It's a Sunday special again. OS has forced me out of bed. I'm absolutely exhausted, but needs must and all that kind of stuff. So, OS, first things first. What the hell's happening? Where's the readers? Where's the specs?
Good question. Good question. I actually just picked up some lens from the opticians. Got a bit of a condition with my eyes, so I've been looking at some lens. They're called scleral lens or something like that. Anyway, long story short, they cost a pretty penny, but it's due to a bit of a condition that I have. But anyway, honestly, I'm seeing
Yeah, I know the condition. It's called vanity.
vanity. Look, the same color eyes, not none of that blue or green nonsense or what have you. But no, I actually just drove home with it, and it was pretty clear. So I've been told to transition phase them in like 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day, 6 hour type of thing. So I'm seeing pretty clearly. You know me, I've always worn spectacles for the last 5, 7 years. I don't know how long, but it feels good, honestly, like to see as clearly as I am doing. With these specific lenses, but like I said, they cost a pretty penny, as does most things in Dubai. So all is good. I'm doing well. How about yourself on this Sunday afternoon? A big game, Sheffield United, Sheffield Wednesday coming
It's
up.
a massive game.
Get it off your chest. You've been held back these last few hours. Go on. Let's hear it.
Well, yeah, I mean, last week when we recorded, it was the game was going on, and I feared the worst, and it transpired that it ended up my worst nightmare. We did get beat midweek. We had a decent result. Burnley, Sheffield United dropped points. Yesterday, Burnley won, and we just. I mean, I'm still fuming. Still fuming. I mean, it's inexcusable. I mean, I've been a vehement critic of Fark, and it to be honest, if anybody can't see the many faults that this guy has, then really they don't understand football, because he's going to cost us. He will cost us dear. Now, there's obviously a massive, massive game as we speak. Obviously, not as much pressure in the sense that obviously it's not Leeds, but it's still. I am nervous. I mean, obviously, my idea would be, to be honest. I mean, it's a massive. It's a Sheffield derby,
Yeah.
so you never know exactly what's going to happen. But I'll take a draw. I'll take a draw. So at least it keeps a bit of a gap. I mean, we'll be top no matter what the
Goal
circumstances are
difference.
because of our
Yeah.
superior goal difference. But really, you want a cushion going into the international break. But and it's just not me. There's lots of Leeds fans going absolutely berserk, and rightly so. And there was a key moment because we've been. I mean, I've always said that his in-game management, his ability to rotate, putting players in the right position. He's been playing Brendan Aronson, albeit he's a 20-odd million pound player. He's been woeful. He's been woeful. I just don't think he's cut out for the English football. He's cut out for English football, especially the Championship, which is a lot more sort of physical. He's been awful for the last 8, 9 weeks. We've been crying out to give somebody else an opportunity in that 10. Park is so stubborn. Eventually, yesterday, I think he saw that the error of his ways. At halftime, he changed it. Nonto played in that number 10 position was outstanding. And we've been calling that as fans for weeks and weeks and weeks. So this is where I always sort of say sometimes the manager doesn't know best. In Fark's case, he certainly doesn't know best. So the rant over. If Sheffield Wednesday can do us a favour, I'll be a little bit calmer later on.
Yeah, I mean, there's 8 games to go, I think, from Leeds and Burnley's perspective, I believe. 2 points
Mm.
clear of Burnley. You mentioned 3 points clear of Sheffield United. I think your goal difference is plus 51, which may well be a determining factor come end of the season, Ayub. We mentioned the peaks and troughs, right? Last weekend when we rolled, obviously it was 0-0 at halftime. You proceeded to lose at home. Therefore, I mean, you were absolutely fuming. Midweek, however, I mean, it just goes to show, doesn't it? You had a lot of positive results go for you, and then obviously you did your bit, winning at home, I believe 2-0 was it?
Yeah.
And then yesterday, I mean, shocking start. R- Kind of got it back on terms. Just quickly from your side, were there many chances to win it at the end? I got it back to 2-2, and then I lost track of the game, to be fair.
Yeah, we were in the ascendancy certainly for after scoring the equaliser for about 20 minutes, and I won't sort of say we had clear-cut chances, but we have enough opportunities to stamp our authority on the game and maybe take a 3-2, 4-2 lead, but we just didn't. We just weren't clinical. They had opportunities as well. I mean, it wasn't a case of it was just one-way traffic. After that 20-minute spell, it became a little bit more even. They had the odd chance here and there. I mean, obviously at 2-0, I'd take a point. You've got to bear in mind, This was QPR on the back of four straight losses. Uh, Portsmouth, after beating us, they've lost the next two games. So it sort of puts into perspective where these clubs are. Uh, Everybody raises their game when they play against Leeds United, but we've got better players. It doesn't matter how much you raise your game. If you are an inferior player, you should not be beating players that are better than you. So that's I put it down to Fark. I'll put it on Fark. But let's see what happens, how it pans out this afternoon. Hopefully, Sheffield Wednesday, who had a really good result last week. They were losing 2-0, they won 3-2. Not sure what result they had midweek,
Yeah.
or maybe that was the midweek result.
I,
But
I do share your
uh,
anxiety in the sense that it's clearly two from this three, and they're incredibly bunched up, especially if Sheffield United win. And with Burnley's penchant for keeping clean sheets generally, and a mean defence, Leeds are in amongst it right now, as opposed to having a little bit of a buffer. So you're right, Sheffield Wednesday win would do you great because that's a 4 point gap. It's three plus the goal difference, so that's four.
yeah,
So at this late stage, four would be significant. So let's see how it all shakes out. But you're right, if Sheffield United win, it's difficult to guess as to which two are going out because it's just so tight.
it is. It is. It's much of a repeat of last season as well, and I just can't take it. It's I'm too long in the tooth to be able to cope with this stress, but it keeps everything exciting. Let's talk about other football, a higher level. But I'm going to indulge you first. I'm going to let you talk about Chelsea, not Chelsea. That would be the insult if I let you talk
Yeah.
about Chelsea. Right, the Arsenal, and potentially, are they? Have they got a chance of winning the Champions League? Because they're still in it. Liverpool we'll talk about as well in this segment. But I want you to talk about the Arsenal because, in a sense, I think they've put all their eggs in that basket. Um, there's still obviously some very, very good sides in the Champions League. But how do you, as an Arsenal fan, feel? I'm not sure who the next game is for the Arsenal in the Champions League, but do you think there is a chance that the Arsenal can, let's say, make it to the final? Let's put it that way. Can they make it to the final?
They can, Ayub. Anything's possible. They are playing the great Real Madrid, so I'm surprised that slipped your mind. It's only the team that's got this unexplained.
I'm under stress with the championships.
Yeah. I'll let you off. I'll let you off. No, I mean we mentioned last time. I mean it could be an incredible affair, and it panned out that way. Real Madrid coming through a very tight affair with Atletico Madrid on penalties, with a little bit of controversy to boot, with the Alvarez double touch. But Real Madrid, I mean, they take some knocking out, and here they are in the quarterfinals, and they will fancy their chances. Especially with Liverpool being knocked out, which we'll come on to. Arsenal can, of course, get to the final. They've got Real Madrid over two legs, which I guess historically, Ayub, is the most difficult out in football right now. Real Madrid over two legs in that Champions League. Not saying it's impossible, but it's a very difficult game to overcome. I don't know if you followed the game yesterday. I think they were playing Villarreal, came from behind to win Mbappe brace, who has had his critics, yours yourself included, but he's flying, isn't he, in terms of La Liga now, really establishing himself as one of the premier forwards in Europe, if not the world. So it's going to take some doing. There's some talk about Saka returning. I just worry that he may have just run out of time. I think he may well be on the bench for that first leg, which is in the first week of April. But look, I think if Arsenal had their best 11 available, I think they would have a chance. I absolutely would. They are a good team, a very good team, I believe, as I've often said. But they are at this stage just short. In terms of not having a striker. Obviously, Saka returning is a huge player for them in terms of being able to produce something out of nothing. He's a consistent kind of his productivity on that right hand side is incredible, especially in terms of chance creation. The statistics prove the same. I just wonder. I just think it's a huge game. It's one of those games where I don't think you can just approach it as per normal. I think there has to be a heightened level of feeling of look, the 11 have to believe, the squad has to believe, the club has to believe that over two legs they can compete with Real Madrid. Quite often, you come up against this type of team with the aura that it has, Ayub, and the game can be lost before a ball is kicked in the sense of feeling, could have done with a slightly more favourable draw. Well, I say, well, if you're going to get to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, these are the kind of teams you're going to be playing. So could it have been a tad easy? Of course, but if you want to be the best, you've got to beat the best. So I think here you go. It is Real Madrid. The other side of the draw is PSG against Aston Villa, and one is a team that, although they've had their way with Arsenal, sometimes Aston Villa in the domestic competition, there'll be a team that's still, from a league position perspective, are inferior to Arsenal. And the other team is one that, although they really come on leaps and bounds, they are absolutely not the same team. From earlier on in the competition, Arsenal dealt with PSG at home fairly handily. Again, caveat being PSG have really gone from strength to strength. That's a very different team as we saw at Anfield and in the first leg at Liverpool. So, and a game and a team that you've seen actually up close and personal this season as well. So, I think Arsenal absolutely can. I think they have to believe. Yes, they've got some challenges with personnel, but even so, you've got to dig in. You've got to defend. I think Atletico Madrid showed some semblance of a blueprint. Now, Arsenal have a way of playing, don't they, which is slightly risk averse and cautious, which has cost them in the Premier League, absolutely, and we'll come on to that perhaps heading into next season. But I think it's probably an approach that against Real Madrid is probably needed. You need to play with a certain level of caution. That front three, with especially with Bellingham in behind, is a monstrous trio or a four to deal with. But I think you have to proceed with caution. I think if you play in a sense of you play, we play. I don't think that's a game that Arsenal are going to do well in against Real Madrid, especially with the firepower that they possess. So, absolutely, they can because ultimately there's 8 left in the competition, Ayub, and anything goes at this stage. I wouldn't put it past Aston Villa to get through, although it's an outside shot because at this stage of the competition, it's a decision here, it's a decision there, it's a slip of a penalty, as you saw the other day, that can ultimately determine the outcome of these tightly contested affairs. So they absolutely can. It'd be a huge fillip if they can get through Real Madrid. What better way to kind of set yourself up for success than beating the champions? So let's see how it goes. I think it's going to be a difficult one. They're underdogs. I think that's pretty clear. But I think they have to believe, and I think if they do that, that's half the battle right there. You
Just on the point of that game, there's always a different mindset, when you're playing two-legged affairs because you've got not just 90 minutes, 180 minutes. So as a coach, it's not just a case of this game; everything's on this game. So what are you playing at home first? Is that the way the fix is? Right. Okay. So what would be the mindset? Because as I said, it's 180 minutes. So really, the first game. Obviously, it can set you up nicely, but what you don't want is obviously to commit everything to that game. I mean, uh, Liverpool. I mean, we'll talk about them. They must have thought it was job done when they won 1-0 at the Parc des Princes. I mean, and I think most observers probably thought the same as well. So, what do you think the mindset will be with Arteta? I mean, do you think they have to take a lead to the Bernabeu?
I don't. I think that will be a lot of what many neutrals will say that they need to go there with something to hold on to some extent. I'm not sure that's the case. I think the key thing is to be in with a shot going into the second leg. I think you alluded to it there. The only way Arsenal are out of this if they take a 2-0, 3-0 pasting or something like that along those lines. I think they'll proceed with caution because that's Arteta's MO. But I don't see him deviating from that. They don't have the guns to really go for them, similar to perhaps how Liverpool went for PSG in that first 15 minutes at Anfield and couldn't quite get the opener. But I think Arsenal will proceed with caution. They'll defend with that solid four, Saliba, Gabriel, Rice, and Partey, because that's essentially how they play. That's what they're most comfortable in. And see if they can play that type of way and get moments of brilliance from a Martinelli, from a Saka if he's healthy. Again, I think he's going to be coming off the bench in that first leg at least. And without a recognised striker, it's just going to be tough sledding, isn't it? You're going up against elite level competition. I mean, PSV were, by all intents and purposes, ultimately a pushover. And Arsenal saw the job through, but the quarters is where it normally tends to get serious. It's got serious pretty fast for Arsenal. But again, if they want to belong in these type of competitions and in these conversations, Ayub, you've got to come and try and get over the line in some of these games, right? Now, I'm not going to be one who says if they do manage to get through 2 legs, saying that somehow everything because ultimately you want to be challenging for competitions, and that'll put them one step closer in the semi-finals. Nothing really achieved just yet. But it's a great fill-up for them in this journey that they're on, in this evolution for the squad, for the confidence that they can compete with the European best, which is something that neutrals do throw at Arsenal, that when it absolutely comes to it, to the crunch, to that kind of you've got to have it moment, Arsenal haven't quite been able to seize the day. So that's something, a narrative that they've got to work hard to overcome. So yeah, as long as they're in the game, I think they'll still go into the Bernabeu with some semblance of confidence that they can create some opportunities away from home.
I mean, you talked about Saka being there or thereabouts in terms of making a comeback. What's the rest of the news with regards to injuries? I know Havertz, I think he's out for the season. What what about the others? Because I mean, I think you've obviously alluded to this, that to play against Real Madrid, you have to have all your big guns. You have to have your gun players. So what's the injury situation at the Arsenal?
Yeah, they're playing Chelsea obviously in 45 minutes. Martinelli's in the 11, so he should be fit and healthy without any additional injuries, let's say. But they'll be without a recognised striker, Jesus and Havertz being out for the season. Saka's the one. Arteta's spoken about how he's back in training during the international break. Obviously, he's not been chosen as part of Thomas Tuchel's first squad for those two qualifiers. Saka, I think, will be back. If he can make the Fulham game on the bench, I think he's got a chance of starting the Real Madrid game. If he's not on the Fulham game bench, if he's not on the bench for that game, I don't see how he ramps up to a game of that intensity to start. I mean, there's one thing coming off the bench playing 10, 15 minutes when teams are tired. It's another altogether when you have to go up against a Real Madrid at home, and that brings itself a pressure, a certain kind of anxiety and a way of playing, an intense level of competition that you don't want to be going in if you're not quite ready. So I think there's a 50-50 chance he can be back. And if he's back and got a chance of starting, Arteta will start him. I just
Yeah.
think he'll be ramped up to the point where he can play perhaps 30 minutes in that first leg. So, I think that also informs Arteta's approach to this two-legged affair, which is try to be in the game going into the Emirates, into the Bernabeu, I should say, and then really have a go at it. And again, if he gets nervous, not that Real Madrid are going to blink if he gets nervous, let's be very clear. But that's probably Arsenal's best shot to take into that last 20, 30 minutes you mentioned about the 180, maybe even extra time if it comes to it, and just try and take advantage of the few opportunities that they will have. And they will get some opportunities. So, yeah, time will tell, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think even if they have a nil at home, I think that in a sense, as long as they're not behind, I think it almost sets it out beautifully because in a sense, perhaps that's what they want, just a straight shootout in Madrid. And maybe that perhaps is what they will be looking for. I mean, he's a conservative coach at the best of times. It's that famous thing. You can't win it in the first leg, but you can lose it. So maybe he might just say, "Well, look, we're not going to lose it. Let's play what to our strengths, which is a conservative brand." But Saka's got to play. I think even if he's not absolutely 100% match fit, uh, this is the only real trophy that they've got a chance of. So he's got to play, unless obviously the injury is just not he's not recovered from the injury. Right, that's one team that's progressed. There's another team surprisingly didn't progress. I mean, it surprised me, and I think it surprised a lot of Liverpool fans. Uh, PSG, you're right. I mean, this is a different animal to the team that we saw at the start of the tournament. Uh, uh, but I never expected it. I really did not expect them to come away as victors. Now, albeit obviously it went to penalties, but I didn't even think it was going to get to that stage. So what's your thoughts? I mean, it's a very disappointing. It was a very disappointing evening for Liverpool. Uh, some of them are quite phlegmatic, but I think they should be bitterly disappointed. I mean, it was theirs to lose and they lost.
Yeah, I mean, I was bitterly disappointed for Liverpool Football Club. I mean, great opportunity. They were the best team in Europe, by all intents and purposes, especially during the league format where Real Madrid struggled somewhat. You'd now say Real Madrid are the favourites just because it's Real Madrid. But the moment Real Madrid snuck through, and there were a lot of eyes on that side of the draw in sense of, well, that was maybe Real going to be done and dusted. Liverpool, I think. Hugely disappointing evening. I don't agree with in a sense, Liverpool fans, where perhaps the argument is that, well, the league is the be all and end all. Yes, absolutely. If you're going to ask at the start of the season that you're going to end up with the Premier League title and potentially one more domestic trophy, which will be determined tonight, Ayub, at Wembley against Newcastle, absolutely they would have taken that. But football's not played like that, is it, Ayub? It's played where you've got to look at the objectives throughout the season. You look at your form. You look at the opportunities that you have before you. And this was a great opportunity to cash one in. You, I don't know if you agree, but I mean, when you're in the last 16 and against PSG and you're firing and you get a 1-0 lucky win, and it was lucky, very fortuitous.
Mm.
I just would have fancied them to see the job through. Now, PSG were incredible. Give them huge amounts of credit. And over the two legs, I think you'd agree that over the two legs, they probably were deserving, although it was still a very unusual game. When normally when you say deserving, you think, well, on the balance of things. But this kind of two-legged game had like periods of dominance for both teams. So it was a bit of an unusual one where you sense that if Liverpool scored that goal with Salah at the start, which he'd normally finish at, you'd fancy him with that great block from the defender. You'd think, well, that could be that in terms of just the way the game would have transpired. So I think for me, it's a hugely disappointing situation for Liverpool. They were beaten by the better team, and give PSG credit. A top team have improved exponentially as the season's gone on. They were able to rest players heading into that game,
Mm.
and you could see that freshness in the extra 30 minutes that were played, where they did create a few good openings and good opportunities. I thought Liverpool defended very well. But I thought Liverpool were dominant in that second half for you. I don't know your thoughts. Yes, in the first half when Dembele scored and they had a few other opportunities. Yes, but Liverpool also had great opportunities in the first half and were dominant in the second half where I can't believe the ball didn't end up in the back of the net at some point. So um, disappointing. The only call out I will have is the manager's done an incredible job this season and he deserves plaudits. He'll probably get manager of the season between him and Nuno, I guess, in the end. And both deserve immense credit. And look, he's done amazingly well. And I think he'll look back on some of his selections. I've been saying for a while that the title is theirs. I think they would have overcome Southampton, irrespective of the fact that they were 1-0 down at half time. And I know it's a difficult one to prove because you can't prove something that didn't happen. I can't prove that Liverpool would have turned that around with Salah on the bench, with a few other gun players on the
Yeah.
bench. Now, what Liverpool fans might argue as a counterpoint is to say, well, we don't have as big a squad or what have you. And I don't really believe in that. I'm saying against the worst team in the league that's perhaps going to go down with perhaps the worst points total in the Premier League history. I think you're going to find a way to win that game. You keep them on the bench in case of emergency. And it's not just the Southampton game. There is a price to pay when you're playing a Mo Salah every single game, top minutes. It's not even as if you're tapering him off at some point where it's 60 minutes, 65, 70. He's playing 80 plus minutes every single game without fail. And he's getting, okay, he got a rest, I think, in the FA Cup game, which they got bounced and what have you against Plymouth. But those minutes have some way of adding up. And yes, these are elite level athletes that can play every 3 games at you, every 3 days, I should say. But doing that over a sustained period of time is not sustainable. And I thought you saw some of that lack of freshness. Now, again, I don't think that is the reason why they lost. They had great opportunities. I'm just saying I wish he'd just banked on the fact that we're going to beat Southampton. It's not disrespectful. I think my second team can beat Southampton or and what have you. And I'm going to rest some of these guys and give them 6 days off or 7 days off or whatever it is. And especially with the Wednesday, Tuesday turnaround between the games, I thought that was all the more necessary. Now, again, some Liverpool fans will argue, I don't want to labour the point too much, but they'll argue, well, Southampton was still the more important game. I don't believe that. The league's won. It's okay to say that. I mean, I know it's okay to be anxious and worried and what have you, but the league is won. It was won some time ago. I've not changed my tune for quite some months, Ayub. It was won some time ago, and you can be smart about how you navigate the challenges of playing so many games. I don't think it's an excuse and say, well, we've got so many games. You hope to be playing so many games every single season, right, Ayub?
Mm.
Going to the latter levels of the Premier League, the Champions League, the FA Cup, the League Cup. And look, it's going to be a successful season for Liverpool this year, especially if they can win tonight. But I just do think that this is something he'll look back on in terms of his approach over the coming years. And if he'll get his chance, he absolutely will. But I just think this is an opportunity missed within the Champions League context. But credit to PSG. I know it's a team that you perhaps like to comment on as well. Um, but again, from my perspective, for Liverpool, unlucky, unfortunate. They were dominant periods of that game, but opportunity missed.
Absolutely concur with everything that you said, and it was the same thing that I was thinking as well. I thought and this is not with hindsight. I was saying at the time that really this could sort of bite a slot in the backside because you're right. I mean, this is Southampton. They've got a huge buffer. They've got enough in their squad. Now you can say it's not the biggest squad, but they've got enough in their squad. I would have absolutely not even had a few players on the bench. Salah would have just stayed at home, rested, which is the key. Because even if he's on the bench, it means he has to get up. There's all sorts of routines. Now, obviously, it's not. These are athletes, supreme athletes, so it's not hugely taxing. But I would have absolutely just rested. And there was somebody who made a good point. I was speaking to a Liverpool fan after the game, and he was sort of saying that it's always sometimes a disadvantage for English teams, especially in the Premier League, because in a sense the competition is a lot more fierce. So every single week there's a lot of challenges. Now for PSG, it's quite an easy league. I mean, they are so streets ahead of the rest of that league that even games that they play, they're probably not as intense as Premier League games. So that's more reason why some of the Liverpool players should have been rested. And when I say rested, not even on the bench, stay at home, lads. Take your time, rest, sleep. So make sure when you're playing that game, because it's about the barest of margins. So maybe I suppose a Salah miss. Maybe if he's got that extra percent, he places it in the right position. So that's why we're talking about such fine margins. And because it was Southampton, it was, in my opinion, a no-brainer. I thought, as I said, I agree with you. I think Slot's been magnificent, but this was something that really, I think, before the game against Southampton, I was thinking, hang on, I don't think this is right. I think he's overestimated Southampton's ability, and I think he's underestimated the players that he has. Because if he feels that he needs the big guns playing to beat Southampton, then there's something not right.
Yeah, and you make a really good point, Ayub, about the rest period. You heard what Carlo Ancelotti said, I think, yesterday about his Real Madrid team having to play less than 72 hours after the Atletico Madrid game, which obviously went to penalties. He said, if we don't get 72 hours next time, we're not rocking up. Simple as. So, which is perhaps the kind of gravitas and claim you can get away with is A, if you're Real Madrid, and B, if you're Carlo Ancelotti, who's won everything. But look, the point is made, isn't it? There are leagues that generally tend to either intentionally help their Champions League participants or representatives, and then you've got leagues which are inferior in terms of its competition. Again, the argument is Liverpool are streets ahead in the league. Say they lost to Southampton, no bother, at least in my eyes, anyway. I mean, worst case scenario. These are the calculated gambles you're paid the big bucks to make. And again, I'll end with this. I don't want to labor the point too much as though he's made a mistake, but I think it is a misstep. I
It is a
really do
mistake.
think
I
it's
think
a
there's no
misstep.
getting away from it.
Just in the sense of I want my team fresh for what is going to be a huge game, especially when I know I've got Aston Villa next, maybe in the quarterfinals. Not saying I'm going to take Villa lightly. It's Unai Emery. It's your European competition. You take them seriously, but
Mm.
PSG were seen as the toughest draw they could have got. So given that how difficult that first leg was, which is evidence before the manager's eyes that this is going to be a tough affair at Anfield, I just feel as though he could have been a lot more brazen with his selection and kept his guys fresh. One final point just out of that game I just wanted to comment was Luis Enrique, a manager who I've got a lot of time for. If you remember, I think he had to step down from Spanish duties as well.
Mm.
Lost his 9-year-old daughter to cancer. He's been through a lot of challenges,
Yeah.
a lot of difficulties, even within his footballing career, especially managing. Obviously, PSG had a lot of stars dealing with all of that in terms of the egos and the stories and everything that comes with that. It's not easy. And now with these kind of young stars who are really looking to prove a point, it would be some story if he can go on to lift the Champions League trophy, especially doing it in a way that PSG perhaps didn't envisage, especially the way they were carrying on in the first years after the ownership change. So, big fillip for him, big kudos. I thought over the course of the two games, they beat arguably one of the best teams in Europe. So, yes, deserves massive respect.
Absolutely right. And I think they've finally found the right formula. I think they're before when they had Neymar, they bought Messi, Mbappe. It just I think these were a lot. Obviously, they paid huge amounts of money. It's a very rich club, but now it looks like a proper football club. It looks like it's a team that wants to win things. It's not just celebrities, because in a sense, it almost became celebrities. Messi's a celebrity. It was his. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the discussions were, what the finances were, but it never looked right for me. Messi going to PSG. It wasn't because it was towards the end of his career. He wasn't the same player. Uh, Neymar was just too much celebrity. Mbappe was he was too big for the club, which I think now why he's performing so well, because in a sense now he knows that he is not the big superstar. He doesn't dictate terms at Real Madrid. He did at PSG. So maybe perhaps he's found his place. He's found his niche. That this is a club where he can't act, can't have the huge ego. He's still got a big ego, but he can't
Yeah.
have the huge ego that he had at PSG. And I think you're right about Enrique. He's had a tumultuous time in the past. And it's absolutely fantastic to see. I've seen them in the flesh a few times, and they're an attractive side. They're a young side, hungry side, and I think they've got as good a chance as
Yep.
any to win the Champions League. And I think no one would begrudge them that. And I hope they do get to the final. I hope they do win it as well, because I have got a soft touch for PSG.
Lots of storylines on that half of the draw. Just before we move on, obviously you've got Real playing Arsenal. That will be a huge affair. Arteta kind of heading over to Spain. It's not that he didn't really carve out much of a career there. Obviously, he's been predominantly in Scotland and England and what have you. But it's a nice opportunity for him to go to Spain, to his home country. Obviously, you've got Real Madrid potentially facing PSG in the semi-finals. The whole storyline about Mbappe and all the rest of it. So there'll be huge stories there. And then there's the potential of an all English semi final, which is Arsenal and Aston
Mm,
Villa. So
yeah.
there's a lot of different
Yeah.
stories around, but time will tell. Should be a fascinating set of games.
All right. Okay. Right. We'll finish off with there was an interview, uh, Jim Radcliffe and Gary Neville. And it was a really interesting interview. I watched most of it. I mean, there's a small segment of about 9 minutes that I've watched in its entirety. But the actual interview, I think, was about 45 minutes. But it's a really fascinating interview. I think before I'd watched the interview, I thought it was just a huge PR exercise, which perhaps it still is. But I kudos to Gary Neville. I think he did ask some tough questions, some challenging questions. Maybe perhaps he could have pushed a little harder. But it was an interesting interview. And this soap opera, Manchester United soap opera, continues. Obviously, they've got these plans of a 2 billion stadium, state of the art. One of the Norman Foster, who, for those who follow architecture, I don't. I just know who Norman Foster is. He's one of the prominent architects. It's a real state of the art design. It looks like a circus, which is pretty apt for Manchester United. But what do you make of it? I mean, obviously you've watched the interview, but what did you make of it, and how did you sort of think Jim Radcliffe came across? And do you think the questions were challenging? Do you think it was a set up by Jim Radcliffe's PR company?
I think the question you're asking is that was it one of those kind of powder puff pieces? And I don't think it was actually. It may well have been
Mm,
set up with that intention, but I don't think it was executed in that way. A couple of quick things. I mean, to some extent, there was some PR element to it. If you remember, I think it was the same evening as when the Overlap podcast or the interview was published, where in the evening they then published, news of the launch of the potential new stadium and what have you. So I think it was somewhat timed, let's say, to reflect hopefully some positive news in the evening as well. A couple of quick things I noticed. So Jim Radcliffe, as part of the interview, kind of sat side on. I don't know if you noticed that, to Gary Neville. I don't know if that was just to put him at ease with the level of questioning and what have you. It's the first time I've heard Sir Jim Radcliffe speak. I could have sought him out in terms of his other businesses, but from a footballing perspective, this was the first proper time uh, that I'd heard him speak. Now, he spoke well. I think you can tell he's obviously a very successful businessman and what have you. Like, he speaks well in terms of what needs to be done, why they've taken some decisions. There were a couple of interesting bits. I think you asked the question, was it as tough a set of questions as perhaps it could have been? I thought it was as tough as can be in these circumstances. I mean, you're granting an interview to an ex-Manchester United legend. Um, you're gonna want it framed in a certain way. Yet I thought Gary Neville still got some tough points across. Obviously, he
Yeah.
probed him strongly, pushed back strongly on the whole issue around the £40,000 that
Yeah.
they've removed from the ex-players, and how Gary Neville obviously suggested one small bit, which I'm sure you're going to speak on, about
Yeah.
how, from a PR perspective, why wouldn't you just raise that in another way, just by organizing some dinner? You get Bruno Fernandes, Harry Maguire, and raise it in another way, an audience with current stars, and put some of those proceeds to ex-players and ex-players' welfare. And I guess the worrying thing there was the response about how
Mm.
he mentioned that, oh, well, nobody's really suggested that.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
pretty good idea. Now, I think that lends itself to essentially the conclusion that he's not got anyone around him that's kind of either strong enough to challenge him or strong enough to put forward the same kind of ideas that Gary Neville did. Now, Gary Neville can put them across because he's not under the stress and pressures of dealing with what is essentially a failing business. He said they were a failing business, a business that was soon to go bust. In that environment, people can become very edgy, can become very kind of in self-preservation mode, let's say. And then when you've got a new boss coming in whose main remit is to somehow increase revenues exponentially and cut costs at a rapid rate, sometimes those opinions are perhaps not as forthcoming, let's say, and people hunker down, shall we say. You've seen that. We've all been there. So that would be the worrying thing, that he's not got good counsel. And any business worth its salt, not least arguably the premier football club in world football, you'd think would have plenty of good counsel, let's say, around the place. Yet every last story that you hear about Man United suggests that it's perhaps not the case. It's supposed to have one of the most oldest kind of scouting networks in terms of the way they do business, very old-fashioned, uh, very overinflated staff, as it appears with Sir Jim Radcliffe's arguments and what have you. I think the challenge with Sir Jim Radcliffe, I guess, is that he's been there for a short amount of time, and he's taken some missteps in his desire to really cut costs and to really boost revenues, whether it's with ticket price increase or whatever. I thought he answered the ticket price increase. I'd have to validate it, but I thought he answered that piece very well in terms of the fact that it actually was a very small portion of tickets that had actually been returned back to the club that they'd sold at face value. But on the whole, I thought he came across well. I think he was talking about the fact that ultimately it's a failing business. He didn't throw Glazers under the bus, which, as much as fans may want to hear that, for me, it does show a little bit about the man, that he wasn't just willing to kind of throw them under the bus. I wouldn't expect anything different. He's got designs to obviously buy the football club at some stage. You don't do that by slagging off the
Mm.
incumbent owners. So
Yeah.
I know he's playing the game, and I think he has to play the game. I think we can accept that. Um, but he's trying to take the club forward. There's been some major mistakes, not least the Dan Ashworth thing and a few others. He spoke how, yes, it was an error. It was an expensive error, but I thought it was best to move on than just kind of stick it out. And there is some semblance of that. It would have been easy for them to say, let's just let Dan ride out a year and then we'll do a quiet parting of ways. But the fact that they moved on from him so quickly, you can argue was A, impulsive, or B, simply, if it's a mistake, you move on, you accept it, and you deal with it quickly. I'm not sure which one it was. But on the whole, I thought it was a very insightful interview. I think it lays bare some of the challenges Man United have, not least spending another 80 million, I think, in this forthcoming summer, buying players that either A are on the books or B have actually been moved on, be it loan, be it elsewhere, which can be quite challenging. So things like that really tell you a little bit about how this club has been run. I guess my last comment would be, Ayub, this is pretty worrying, I would say, if you're Ruben Amorim. I mean, there's been some rumors about the fact he's not going to get a lot to spend. And that club, that footballing side needs a lot of work and a lot of major surgery. Yes, another major surgery. But if you're a new manager who wants to really make some big changes and return this club from 15th, I think, which is where they start today, before their game, I think, against Leicester, you would hope or want to hear a lot more positive noises about cash that may be available. Yet here they are having to, or obligated to, spend another 80 odd million on players that they don't really even want to keep, yet are obligated to do so, are checks. I mean, he made it very clear. I think the phrase he used there was, even if we don't buy another player, I'm writing a check of 80 million this summer,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I thought was a painful line. But yeah, I mean, look, on the whole, insightful, interesting, a good piece, I think, just from a journalistic perspective, and as a watch and as a listen, for me, fascinating stuff, good questions. I think as United fans, at least you've got to accept he's up there, he's talking, he's giving us a view of what the business is. You may not agree with some of the steps, but he's the one investing in the business. And as it goes in this world that we live in, if you own something or if you own a part of something, you get to call the shots. Therein lies the challenge. Time will tell if Man United will come back to the big time. I think what that interview laid bare, just before I hand it off to you, Ayub, is that the depths or the starting point for this recovery is perhaps even more stark and grave than even maybe you and I had considered.
Yeah, a really good interview, and I encourage even non-Manchester United
Yeah,
supporters who've not seen the interview, watch it, because it is, as I said, I mean, there is this danger that you just sort of think it's a setup or a staged PR exercise, but even if it is, as I said, I mean, it's like always you talked about it. That he asked uh, sort of challenging questions, as I said. I mean, maybe perhaps I would have liked a little bit more probing, but really, I give absolute credit to Gary Neville on that sort of piece about 40,000. He really was insistent.
yeah,
It was something that, and you're absolutely right. I think the reaction or the response. That he wasn't aware. I mean, maybe it's a reflection of where he is now. I mean, he talks about he spent the first 10 years of his life in a council estate. I think those days are far removed. I don't think he thinks about it too often. I think he's in a different circle because if he did think about that, he would have thought about that. And Gary Neville said that these aren't players from the 80s and 90s who perhaps have got much more money. These are sort of 60s and 70s players who perhaps need that little bit of extra support.
yeah,
And he also talks about the free lunches as well.
yeah,
I mean, what I feel that Ratcliffe is doing is, I mean, we both work in business, so we know how business works and how sometimes business, sort of owners of business or CEOs operate. Because in a sense, sometimes you have to look at savings, and sometimes it's low-hanging fruits. It's easy to do, and I think that's what he's done here. Because in a sense, he perhaps feels that there's little comeback. I mean, there'll be obviously concern in terms of perception, but in terms of actual physical comeback, you're not going to get the cleaners coming back to you and arguing with you. Simple as that. You're not going to get the ex-players coming back and argue with you. Dan Ashworth, I mean, it was a mighty, mighty payout. Now he would come back and argue if obviously he was removed and wasn't suitably recompensed. Good interview. I mean, he is a fan. I mean, there's no question that he's a fan of Manchester United. He wants to see the glory days back. So that is something that I think as a United fan you'd be happy with. That this is a guy who genuinely uh, loves this football club. Uh, I think the ideas for the stadium as well. What impressed me about that was that he was thinking about atmosphere. He wanted it to be a hostile atmosphere, and I think uh, certainly the setup, because I do feel that a lot of the new stadia, the stands when they're going away, you're so far away from the pitch that perhaps it's not the intense experience that you want. So he was very keen on making sure that the pitch was quite close to where the fans are, and the stands were going uh, upwards rather than just going in a horizontal way. So that as a fan, I would be happy with that. He's even thinking about those minor details, those details that are very very important. Uh, he does want to win things. I think that's what came across. But ultimately, he's a businessman. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who's a Spurs fan, and I always say to him that, look, Daniel Levy is a businessman first and foremost. He's made Tottenham Hotspurs one of the most successful businesses in in football. Now they've not won anything, and I almost thought that perhaps that's the model that Jim Radcliffe is going down. That right, if we have a state-of-the-art stadia, uh, the amount of income that accrues
yes,
uh, is going to be phenomenal. Now, obviously, ultimately, I mean, football is a slightly different business. I mean, it's one of those rare businesses that you can still make losses and it still sort of functions in any other walk of life, in any other business. If they had losses, the business would fold and would close. But with football, it's slightly different. But I think the model, certainly that Spurs have uh, sort of shows that you don't have to win anything. If you have a super stadia, in a sense, you can almost sort of run very efficiently, make profits, and not rely on winning things. I think with Ratcliffe, it's different. I think he does want to win things. He does want to see United as one of the top 3, 4 clubs in the world. But he's got this, I think, this dual objective where he wants to see success on the pitch, but he certainly wants to see success off it as well.
Yeah, and I think success off the field. I mean, building a big stadium is potential for huge revenues. I think the top three revenue generating football clubs in the world, but that should put them in another stratosphere in terms of being able to command more income, whether it's cross sports. You can think about concerts, things like this, but all the different types of revenue that they should be able to generate off the back of that. Now, again, probably not mutually exclusive. Those are funds that you can then kind of rechannel and put into kind of improving the recruitment side of things, especially from a playing perspective. The key thing for United right now, Ayub, is this stadium's at least 5 years away. But we don't know about planning permission and all the rest of it, but it's at least 5 years away. In the meantime, they've got a very dire product out there on the pitch. Now, how you go about improving that at a time when you're still looking at cost cutting and all the rest of it and playing for players that you don't currently have or even wish to keep, it's a big hole. It's a big hole they need to fill. It's one of the reasons why you keep hearing rumors about selling prized assets like a Garnacho, like a Kobe Mainu, where you might still be able to command decent fees. Even over the weekend, I was thinking whether or not if a big team was to come in for a Fernandez, who's been playing really well recently, what would that do to him as club captain? Would he stick around for this rebuild because that's what it is, or is he going to think this is my time to win titles or win Champions Leagues because he's elevated his game to that point where you think, he may also be looking kind of sideways. Does he also fit in with the United timeline? Because United look like a little way away, don't they? You're from being back in the reckoning. So I just think their route back from where they are now to challenging at the top of the Premier League title, top Premier League, I would say, it's challenging right now. I can't see it. That pathway looks very difficult for all types of reasons, not least United struggles, but also the fact that the other clubs in the league seem to be much more well run and much more well placed, let's say, to take the next few years on. So yeah, great interview. You're right. Any not even non-football, non-United fans should probably catch that. I think it was about 50 minutes, Ayub, but a fascinating listen.
Right. Okay. Right. And on that note, I think we'll call it a day because I think the Arsenal playing in about 10 minutes, which I'm sure you'll want to watch. Not sure why, because it's absolutely pointless now. So, but it'll just
Uh,
be interesting. I suppose it'll pass the afternoon.
It'll pass the after. We've got another hour and a bit for iftar, and I did miss suhoor this morning, so I'm watching the minutes.
And I've been checking the score. Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United. It was 0-0 about a minute ago, so I'm not sure whether it's still 0-0, but I think they're heading towards half time. So at the moment, all good, all good. As always, an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Some great chat, some great points of view as always. All right. So on that note, folks, we'll bid you off. Well, I'm going to go back to bed. All right. See you later. Ta-da.